Anyway, not a liar, a cheat. But who is a cheat? Said Varenka reproachfully. You speak as if... But Kitty was in one of her gusts of fury, and she wouldn't let her finish. I don't talk about you, not about you at all. You're perfection. Yes, I know you're all perfection. But what am I to do if I'm bad? This would never have been if I weren't bad. So let me be what I am. I won't be a fake. What have I to do with Anna Pavlovna? Let them go their way and me go mine. I can't be different. And yet it's not that. It's not that. What is not that? Asked Varenka in bewilderment. Everything. I can't act except from the heart, and you act from principle. I liked you because I liked you, but you probably only wanted to save me, to improve me. You're unfair, said Varenka. But I'm not speaking of other people, I'm speaking of myself. Kitty, they heard her mother's voice, come here. Show Papa your coral necklace. Kitty, with a haughty air, without making peace with her friend, took the coral necklace from a little box on the table and went to her mother. What's the matter? Why are you so flushed? Her mother and father said to her with one voice. Nothing, she answered. I'll be right back. And she ran back. She's still here, she thought. What am I to say to her? Oh dear, what have I done? What have I said? Why was I rude to her? What am I to do? What am I to say to her? Thought Kitty, and she stopped in the doorway. Varenka, in her hat and with the parasol in her hands, was sitting at the table examining the spring of her parasol which Kitty had broken. She lifted her head. Varenka, do forgive me, whispered Kitty, going up to her. I don't remember what I said. I really didn't mean to hurt you, said Varenka, smiling. Peace was made, but with her father's coming, the whole world in which she had been living was transformed for Kitty. She didn't give up everything she had learned, but she became aware that she had deceived herself in supposing she could be what she wanted to be. Her eyes were, it seemed, opened. She felt all the difficulty of maintaining herself without hypocrisy and self-conceit on the pinnacle she had wished to mount. Moreover, she became aware of all the dreariness of the world of sorrow, of sick and dying people in which she had been living. The efforts she had made to like it seemed to her intolerable. And she felt a longing to get back quickly into the fresh air, to Russia, to Yergusheva, where, as she knew from letters, her sister Dolly had already gone with her children. But her affection for Varenka didn't wane. As she said goodbye, Kitty begged her to come and see them in Russia. I'll come when you get married, said Varenka. I shall never marry. Well then, I shall never come. Well then, I shall be married simply for that. Mind you remember your promise, said Kitty. The doctor's prediction was fulfilled. Kitty returned home to Russia cured. She was not as gay and thoughtless as before, but she was serene. Her Moscow troubles had become a memory. Part 3, Chapter 1. Sergei Ivanovich Koznishev wanted a rest from mental work, and instead of going abroad as he usually did, he went to stay in the country with his brother toward the end of May. In his judgment, the best sort of life was a country life. He had come now to enjoy such a life at his brother's. Konstantin Levin was very glad to have him, especially as he didn't expect his brother Nikolai that summer. But in spite of his affection and respect for Sergei Ivanovich, Konstantin Levin was uncomfortable with his brother in the country. It made him uncomfortable, and it positively annoyed him to see his brother's attitude toward the country. To Konstantin Levin, the country was where one spent one's life, where there were pleasures, endeavors, labor. To Sergei Ivanovich, the country meant on one hand rest from work, on the other a valuable antidote to the corrupt influences of town, which he took with satisfaction and a sense of its utility. To Konstantin Levin, the country was especially good because it afforded an opportunity for labor, of the usefulness of which there could be no doubt. To Sergei Ivanovich, the country was particularly good, because there it was possible and fitting to do nothing. Moreover, Sergei Ivanovitch's attitude toward the peasants rather piqued Konstantin. Sergei Ivanovitch used to say that he knew and liked the peasantry, and he often talked to the peasants, which he knew how to do without affectation or condescension. And from every such conversation he would deduce general conclusions in favor of the peasantry, and in confirmation of his knowing them. Konstantin Levin didn't like such an attitude toward the peasants. To Konstantin, the peasant was simply the chief partner in their common labor, and in spite of all the respect and the love, almost like that of kinship, he had for the peasant, imbibed probably, as he said himself, with the milk of his peasant nurse, still, as their partner, while sometimes enthusiastic over the vigor, gentleness, and justice of these men, he was often, when their common labors called for other qualities, exasperated with the peasant for his carelessness, disorganization, drunkenness, and lying. If he had been asked whether he liked or didn't like the peasants, Konstantin Levin would have been absolutely at a loss as to what to reply. He liked and didn't like the peasants, just as he liked and didn't like men in general. Of course, being a good-hearted man, he liked men more than he disliked them, and so too with the peasants. But like or dislike the common people as something apart, he could not only because he lived with them, and all his interests were bound up with theirs, but also because he regarded himself as a part of them, didn't see any special qualities or failings distinguishing himself from the common people, and could not contrast himself with them. Moreover, although he had lived so long in the closest relations with the peasants, as farmer and arbitrator, and what was more, as adviser, the peasants trusted him, and for 30 miles around they would come to ask his advice, he had no definite views of the peasantry, and would have been as much at a loss to answer the question whether he knew the common people as the question whether he liked them. For him to say he knew the peasantry would have been the same as to say he knew men. He was continually watching and getting to know people of all sorts, and among them peasants, whom he regarded as good and interesting people, and he was continually discovering new traits, altering his former views of them, and forming new ones. With Sergei Ivanovitch it was quite the contrary. Just as he liked and praised a country life in comparison with the life he did not like, so too he liked the peasantry in contradistinction to the class of men he didn't like, and so too he knew the peasantry as something distinct from and opposed to men generally. In his methodical brain there were distinctly formulated certain aspects of peasant life, deduced partly from that life itself, but chiefly from contrast with other modes of life. He never changed his opinion of the peasantry and his sympathetic attitude toward them. In the discussions that arose between the brothers on their views of the peasantry, Sergei Ivanovitch always got the better of his brother, precisely because Sergei Ivanovitch had definite ideas about the peasant, his character, his qualities, and his tastes. Konstantin Levin had no definite and unalterable idea on the subject, and so in their arguments Konstantin was readily convicted of contradicting himself. In Sergei Ivanovitch's eyes, his younger brother was a splendid fellow, with his heart in the right place, as he expressed it in French, but with a mind which, though fairly quick, was too much influenced by the impressions of the moment, and consequently filled with contradictions. With all the condescension of an elder brother, he sometimes explained to him the true import of things, but he derived little satisfaction from arguing with him, because he got the better of him too easily. Konstantin Levin regarded his brother as a man of immense intellect and culture, noble in the highest sense of the word, and possessed of a special faculty for working for the public good. But in the depths of his heart, the older he became, and the more intimately he knew his brother, the more and more frequently the thought struck him that this faculty of working for the public good, of which he felt himself utterly devoid, was possibly not so much a quality as a lack of something, not a lack of good, honest, noble desires and tastes, but a lack of vital force, of what is called heart, of that impulse which drives a man to choose one out of the innumerable paths of life, and to care only for that one. The better he knew his brother, the more he noticed that Sergei Ivanovitch and many other people who worked for the public welfare were not led by an impulse of the heart to care for the public good, but reasoned from intellectual considerations that it was a right thing to take interest in public affairs, and consequently took interest in them. Levin was confirmed in this generalization by observing that his brother didn't take questions affecting the public welfare or the question of the immortality of the soul any more to heart than he did chess problems or the ingenious construction of a new machine. Besides this, Konstantin Levin was not at ease with his brother, because in summer in the country, Levin was continually busy with work on the land, and the long summer day was not long enough for him to get through all he had to do, while Sergei Ivanovitch was taking a holiday. But though he was taking a holiday now, that is to say, he was doing no writing, he was so used to intellectual activity that he liked to put into concise and eloquent shape the ideas that occurred to him, and liked to have someone to listen to him. His most usual and natural listener was his brother, and so, in spite of the friendliness and directness of their relations, Konstantin felt an awkwardness in leaving him alone. Sergei Ivanovitch liked to stretch himself on the grass in the sun, and to lie there, basking and chatting lazily. "You wouldn't believe," he would say to his brother, "what a pleasure this rural laziness is to me. Not an idea in one's brain, as empty as a drum." But Konstantin Levin found it boring sitting and listening to him, especially when he knew that while he was away they would be carting manure to fields that were not ploughed and ready for it, and heap it all up anyhow, and would not screw the shares in the ploughs, but would let them come off, and then say that the new ploughs were a silly invention, and there was nothing like the old Andreevna plough, and so on. "Come, you've done enough trudging about in the heat," Sergei Ivanovitch would say to him. "No, I must just run to the office for a minute," Levin would answer, and he would run off to the fields. Chapter 2. Early in June, it happened that Agafia Mikhailovna, the old nurse and housekeeper, in carrying to the cellar a jar of mushrooms she had just pickled, slipped, fell, and sprained her wrist. The district doctor, a talkative young medical student who had just finished his studies, came to see her. He examined the wrist, said it was not broken, was delighted at the chance of talking to the celebrated Sergei Ivanovitch Koznishev, and to show his advanced views of things, he told him all the gossip of the district, complaining of the poor state into which the district council had fallen. Sergei Ivanovitch listened attentively, asked him questions, and, roused by a new listener, talked fluently, uttered a few keen and weighty observations, respectfully appreciated by the young doctor, and was soon in the eager frame of mind his brother knew so well, which inevitably followed a brilliant and eager conversation. After the departure of the doctor, he wanted to go with a fishing rod to the river. Sergei Ivanovitch was fond of angling, and was, it seemed, proud of being fond of such a stupid occupation. Konstantin Levin, whose presence was needed in the fields and the meadows, had come to take his brother in the trap. It was at that time of the year, the turning point of summer, when the crops of the present year are a certainty, when one begins to think of the sowing for next year, and the harvest is at hand, when the rye is formed, though its ears are still light, not yet full, and grey-green it waves in the wind, when the green oats, with tufts of yellow grass scattered here and there among it, droop irregularly over the late-sown fields, when the early buckwheat is already out and hiding the ground, when the fallow land, trodden hard as stone by the cattle, is half-ploughed over, with paths too hard to be touched by the plough, when from the dry manure heaps carted onto the fields there comes at sunset a smell of manure mingled with the honeyed odour of grasses, and on the lowlands, the riverside meadows, are a thick sea of grass waiting for the mowing, with blackening heaps of sorrel stalks among it. It was at the time when there comes a brief pause in the toil of the fields before the beginning of the labours of the harvest, every year recurring, every year straining every nerve of the peasants. The crop was a splendid one, and the bright, hot summer days had set in with short, dewy nights. The brothers had to drive through the woods to reach the meadows. Sergei Ivanovitch was all the while admiring the beauty of the woods, which were a tangled mass of leaves, pointing out to his brother here an old lime tree on the point of flowering, dark on the shady side and brightly spotted with the yellow stipules, there the young shoots of this year's saplings, brilliant with emerald. Konstantin Levin didn't like talking and hearing about the beauty of nature. Words for him diminished the beauty of what he saw. He agreed to what his brother said, but he couldn't help beginning to think of other things. When they came out of the woods, his attention was completely engrossed by the view of the fallow land on the slope of a hill, in parts yellow with grass, in parts trampled and checkered with furrows, in parts dotted with the ridges of manure, and in parts even ploughed. A string of carts was moving across it. Levin counted the carts, and was pleased that all that were needed had been brought, and at the sight of the meadows his thoughts passed to the mowing. He always felt singularly excited at the haymaking. On reaching the meadow, Levin stopped the horse. The morning dew was still lying on the thick undergrowth of the grass, and so that he might not get his feet wet, Sergei Ivanovich